Why do some minds connect dots that nobody else can see? Richard Feynman wins a Nobel Prize in physics, then teaches himself bongo drums, then decodes Mayan hieroglyphs, then cracks safes full of nuclear secrets, just for fun. Was his brain built different? For decades, that's what people believed. Then neuroscience and cognitive psychology started taking the idea apart. What they found is uncomfortable. Genius isn't about IQ. It's about a method. And the method is reproducible. For most of the 20th century, the dominant idea was simple. Genius is something you're born with. Some people get the gift. Most don't. Move on. The science backing that view came from early IQ research. The tests measured something. Call it raw cognitive horsepower. And people who scored high tended to do well in school, in math, in science. Case closed. The conclusion: if you want to know who'll do something extraordinary, measure their IQ. Then a strange thing happened. Richard Feynman, the one who got a Nobel Prize for quantum electrodynamics, took an IQ test as a kid and scored 125. That's bright. But it's not genius level. It's not even in the top 1%. By the standards of high IQ societies, he wouldn't qualify. And yet he reframed entire branches of physics. He invented diagrams that physicists still use today. He explained the cause of a space shuttle disaster on national television by dropping a small rubber ring into ice water. He played in samba bands. He picked locks at the Manhattan Project. He learned Portuguese to give lectures in Brazil. He decoded Mayan astronomy as a hobby. A score of 125 doesn't predict any of that. So researchers had a problem. The simple model, high IQ in, breakthrough out, wasn't holding up. There were people with much higher IQ scores who never produced anything original. There were people with average scores who reshaped fields. Something else was doing the work. Studies on creative achievement started to make a hard distinction. There's intelligence, and there's creative output. The two correlate up to a point, somewhere around an IQ of 120, and then they decouple. Above that threshold, more IQ does almost nothing. What predicts breakthrough thinking is something else entirely. Something the IQ test can't measure. That something is how you connect things. How you take an idea from one place and use it somewhere else. How you carry around problems and look for tools to solve them across every field you encounter. The technical name is combinatorial thinking. And here's the part that matters. It isn't a fixed trait. It's a habit. A trainable habit. Genius, it turns out, is mostly method. In 1980, two cognitive psychologists ran an experiment that quietly became one of the most cited studies in problem-solving research. They gave people a hard medical puzzle. A patient has a tumor deep inside the body. There's a ray that can destroy it, but at full strength the ray also destroys healthy tissue on the way in. How do you kill the tumor without harming the patient? About 10% of people figured it out on their own. The trick is to use several weaker rays from different angles, all converging on the tumor. Most people couldn't see it. Then the experimenters tried something different. Before giving the puzzle, they had participants read a totally unrelated story. A general trying to capture a fortress surrounded by roads that would collapse under a large army. The general splits his forces into small groups and sends them down different roads to converge on the fortress at the same time. Same structure, different domain. After reading the story, about 30% of people solved the medical puzzle. That's already triple the baseline. But here's the twist. When experimenters added one sentence, a hint that the story might be useful for the puzzle, the solution rate jumped to 92%. 92. So the knowledge was already there. The story carried the answer. But most people couldn't see across the gap from one domain to another without a nudge. The cognitive ingredient that turned 30% into 92% wasn't more intelligence. It was the simple act of noticing. I've seen this shape before, in a different field. That's analogical thinking. And once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere in the history of breakthroughs. A Swiss engineer comes home from a walk and notices burrs stuck to his dog's fur. He looks at them under a microscope. Tiny hooks. Years later, he turns that into a fastener used by everyone on the planet. We call it Velcro. Japanese engineers building a faster bullet train have a problem. When the train exits a tunnel at high speed, it makes a sound like a sonic boom. They study the kingfisher. The kingfisher dives from air into water, two media with very different density, without making a splash. Its beak has a specific shape. They reshape the front of the train to match the beak. The boom disappears. Top speed goes up. Energy use drops by 15%. A 400-year-old astronomer, working out how planets move, looks at sunlight. He notices light spreads from the sun, weakens with distance, and somehow still reaches Earth. He thinks, Maybe there's a force that does the same thing, spreads from the sun, weakens with distance, pulls planets along. He doesn't have the math, but the analogy points him toward the idea of gravity, decades before anyone formalizes it. These people weren't smarter than their colleagues in any IQ sense. They were better at one specific move. They carried a problem in mind, and when they ran into something from a completely different domain, they tested whether it fit the problem. Birds and clothes, birds and trains, light and gravity. Modern neuroscience has started to map this. A meta-analysis published in 2025 looked at brain imaging studies of creative thinking. The finding was specific. Creative output isn't tied to one super-smart region. It's tied to how flexibly your brain switches between two networks. The default mode network, which is active when you daydream and let your mind wander, and the executive control network, which is active when you focus and evaluate ideas. The people who score highest on creative tasks don't have a stronger version of either network. They have more switching between them. Their minds spread out, narrowed down, spread out again, many times per minute. Wandering finds the unusual connections. Focus tests whether they actually work. Genius, in the brain, looks like flexible toggling. This pattern explains something that was always weird about historical breakthroughs. The eureka moment in the shower. The insight while walking. The solution that arrives the morning after a hard day of trying. Diffuse mental states make remote connections more likely. Then focused attention catches them and turns them into a real answer. There's a third strand of research worth knowing. A 2004 book called The Medici Effect, named after the Florentine banking family of the 15th century, made a simple case. The Medici brought painters, sculptors, philosophers, scientists, and architects into the same physical space. The result was the Italian Renaissance. The book argued, with examples drawn from modern industry, that breakthroughs happen at the intersection of fields, not deep inside one. Where two disciplines meet, the existing rules don't fully apply. Recombination becomes possible. If you sit only in your own field, you have access to the moves your field already knows. If you sit at an intersection, you have access to the moves of every field you touch. The math is brutal. Two fields don't give you twice the options. They give you the options of field 1, plus the options of field 2, plus all the combinations between them. Possibility space explodes. So 3 independent lines, cognitive psychology, neuroscience, and innovation studies, point in the same direction. Breakthrough thinking isn't a higher quantity of pure intelligence. It's a kind of cross-field motion, carrying problems from one place to another, noticing structural similarities across domains, switching between wandering and focusing. Now here's what makes all of this useful. None of it is a fixed trait. The radiation problem study didn't measure IQ. It measured how often people got nudged toward analogical transfer. When the nudge was there, almost everyone could do it. The skill is sitting in your brain already. The question is how often you use it. And history's most original thinkers seem to have known this. They built routines around it. One physicist had a habit his colleagues found puzzling. He kept a small set of unsolved problems in his head, between 10 and 15, depending on the time. Whenever he encountered a new technique, a new finding, a new fact from any field, he tested it against each of his problems. Most of the time, no fit. But occasionally, something clicked. The new tool, from somewhere else, would crack one of his stored problems. He'd publish a paper. Colleagues would say it looked like magic. The mathematician who described this method had a name for it. He called it the genius's secret, which is a strong phrase, because the man saying it was no slouch himself, and he meant it almost technically. Carry your problems. Cross-pollinate constantly. Stay open to the moment of fit. The question is how you turn this into a daily habit instead of an interesting fact about geniuses. There are a few moves that show up over and over in the people who do this well. The first is the favorite problems list. Pick somewhere between 5 and 12 open questions you genuinely care about. Not goals, not tasks. Real puzzles you don't yet know how to solve. They can be professional. How do I make my product faster? How do I explain this concept clearly? How do I price what I do? They can be personal. Why do I procrastinate on this kind of work? Why does my energy crash at 3 in the afternoon? What makes some of my conversations memorable and others forgettable? Write them down. Keep the list somewhere you see it often. Update it every few months as some get solved and new ones appear. This single act changes how your brain processes everything. A book you read, a conversation you overhear, a video you watch. Your mind starts running a quiet test in the background. Does this fit one of my problems? Most of the time, no. But the times it does are the moments other people miss. The second move is the cross-field reading rule. Most people read inside their own discipline. The deeper this gets, the narrower your input. The fix is simple. For every 3 pieces of content you consume in your own field, take one from a completely different one. If you work in software, read about architecture, biology, music. If you work in medicine, read about engineering, urban planning, behavioral economics. The point isn't to become an expert in those fields. It's to load up your inventory of structural patterns. Mental models, you might call them. Each new field gives you new shapes. Each new shape multiplies what you can recognize. The third move is the writing to understand habit. There's a quote found on a famous physicist's blackboard after his death. What I cannot create, I do not understand. The point isn't ego. It's a test. If you can't rebuild an idea from scratch in your own words, with your own examples, you've memorized words about the idea, not the idea itself. The popular version of this is sometimes called the Feynman technique. Take a concept. Write it out as if explaining it to someone with no background. Find the spots where you stumble. Those are the parts you don't really understand yet. Go back to the source. Try again. Studies in 2024 found that students using this technique outperformed control groups on conceptual understanding by significant margins. One 12-week study saw scores climb from 65% to 82%, while the control group barely moved. The mechanism is forced compression. The act of explaining strips away decoration and forces the underlying structure into view. The fourth move is the slow incubation rule. Don't try to solve everything in one sitting. Drop a problem into your stack. Work on something else. Walk, sleep. The brain network research is unambiguous on this. Diffuse states are when remote connections form. Always-on focus actually blocks the switching that breakthroughs need. The most productive workdays are not the ones where you grind for 10 hours. They're the ones where you do 3 good hours of focus. Then let your mind run. What to avoid here matters just as much. Don't keep too many open problems. Past about 15, your brain stops testing each one carefully. Don't read everything in random fields with no anchor. Without your own questions, the input doesn't bind. And don't expect immediate connection. Most days nothing clicks. The breakthroughs come from the rare days when something does, and those rare days only happen if you've been loading the system for months. How to know it's working? Roughly once a week, an idea from one of your inputs should connect to one of your favorite problems. If that's not happening at all, your problems are too vague or your reading is too narrow. Sharpen one or both. 3 things to take away. First, genius, the kind that produces breakthroughs, isn't a trait. It's a method. Combinatorial thinking. Noticing, transferring, recombining across fields. Second, the brain doing this isn't a special brain. It's any brain that's been trained to switch between wandering and focusing, with a clear set of problems sitting in the background. Third, the most powerful single move is the favorite problems list. 5 to 12 open questions. Carry them everywhere. Test new inputs against them. The hits are rare, but the hits are everything. What to do this week? Sit down for 15 minutes and write your list. No editing, no second guessing. 5 to 12 questions you actually care about that you don't yet have the answer to. Keep them somewhere visible. Then for the next 7 days, every time you read or watch something, ask one quiet question. Does this connect to anything on my list? This is one of those situations where what looks like a flash of brilliance turns out to be the result of months or years of slow loading. The flash is real, but what made it possible was a habit so ordinary that almost nobody bothers with it. If videos like this, where the method behind something hard to copy gets unpacked with the data and the mechanism, are useful, subscribe. The channel keeps coming back to evidence-based methods for thinking and working better. More breakdowns of how high performers actually operate, grounded in research, are on the way.